Dusty's quiet ranch. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, illuminating Sarah's photograph on the mantelpiece. Dusty Rivers stared at the smiling image, the corners of her eyes crinkled with laughter. He traced the outline of her face with a calloused finger, the silence of the room pressing down on him like a heavy saddle. It had been 3 years since the fever took her, 3 years of echoing emptiness in a house that once vibrated with her warmth. He sighed, the sound swallowed by the vastness of the ranch. Outside, the wind whispered through the tall grass, rustling like Sarah's skirts as she walked. He remembered the scent of her lavender soap, the way she hummed while she baked bread. Now, only the scent of dust and leather permeated the air. The cattle needed tending. Dusty grabbed his hat and gloves, the familiar way to small comfort. He rode out, the rhythmic creak of the saddle and the steady gait of his horse, Buck, a soothing balm to his restless spirit. He mended fences, his movements economical and precise, born of years of practice. Each swing of the hammer, each strand of wire tightened, was a small act of defiance against the loneliness that threatened to engulf him. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Dusty returned to the house. He fried a piece of salt pork and boiled some potatoes, the simple meal a stark contrast to the elaborate suppers Sarah used to prepare. He sat at the long, wooden table, the emptiness of the other chairs a palpable presence. He ate in silence, the only sound the clinking of his fork against the plate. He wished, not for the first time, for someone to share the meal with, someone to break the oppressive quiet. The shadows deepened and Dusty knew another long, lonely night lay ahead. A wagon on the horizon. Dusty Rivers squinted, the sun a brutal hand against his brow. Another scorcher brewing. He leaned against the porch railing, the wood rough against his calloused palms. Days bled into weeks, each one a carbon copy of the last since Martha. A flicker of movement on the horizon snagged his attention. A wagon. Small, alone, and moving slow. He watched it crawl closer, the wheels kicking up dust devils that danced in the shimmering heat. As it drew nearer, he could make out 2 figures, a woman and a child. Both slumped with exhaustion. Navajo, likely. He hadn't seen many travel this far west. The wagon creaked to a halt a respectful distance from the house. The woman, her face etched with weariness but framed by strong features, met his gaze directly. The little girl, no older than 5, clung to her mother's skirt, her eyes wide and wary. "We need water," the woman said, her voice raspy. "And a place to rest." Dusty hesitated. He hadn't spoken more than a dozen words in a week. His ranch was his sanctuary, a place for his grief. Yet something in the woman's eyes, a deep well of sorrow that mirrored his own, made him relent. "There's water by the well. And the barn's empty. Help yourselves." He turned away, back into the dim coolness of the house, the silence less oppressive now, but strangely charged. Finding a home. The spare room smelled faintly of lavender and disuse. Morning Star pushed open the window, letting in a gust of dry, sun-baked air. Dust motes danced in the golden light, illuminating the room's bareness. A simple bed, a scarred dresser, and a small, woven rug were the only furnishings. Little Bird, however, found it fascinating. She ran her fingers along the rough-hewn walls, giggling as the dust tickled her nose. Later, while Morning Star unpacked their few belongings, Little Bird ventured outside. Dusty watched from the porch, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, as the little girl discovered a box of his childhood toys in the barn. A worn-out wooden horse became her instant favorite. She galloped around the corral, her laughter echoing across the quiet ranch. The next morning, Morning Star found Dusty struggling to mend a broken fence. Without a word, she picked up a hammer and began to work alongside him. Her movements were efficient and strong, born of necessity. As they worked, she told him stories of her grandmother's sheep, of the wide, open mesas under the endless sky. Dusty, in turn, spoke of his late wife, Sarah, and their dreams for the ranch. The stories were simple, the smiles genuine, a fragile bridge forming between them. But the shadow in Morning Star's eyes hadn't fully lifted. It was a constant reminder, a silent question hanging in the air. How long could this peace last? Whispers of danger. A gust of wind, smelling of dust and distant rain, whipped down Main Street, scattering tumbleweeds and loose papers. One sheet, thicker than most, snagged momentarily on a hitching post before tearing free and cartwheeling past the general store. It plastered itself against the dusty window of the saloon, momentarily obscuring the view of men playing cards inside. Old Man Hemlock, squinting against the sun, peeled the poster free. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, widened. A crude woodcut portrait leered back at him. Snake Eye Johnson, wanted for robbery, arson, and murder across 3 territories. Hemlock's gaze dropped to the smaller print beneath the image. Reward offered for information leading to the apprehension of or information regarding a woman bearing a star-shaped tattoo. Said woman believed to be traveling with a young child. Hemlock sucked in a breath, his gaze darting down the street. He saw Dusty mending a fence in front of his small house, Morningstar's daughter, Lily, playing in the dirt nearby. He knew Morningstar had such a tattoo. A knot of townsfolk had gathered, murmuring and pointing at the poster now nailed to the general store door. Snake Eye Johnson, someone whispered, their voice laced with fear. They say he skins folks alive. Another voice, lower still, added, and that woman, what's she done to draw his attention? Hemlock felt a cold dread creep into his bones. Dusty was a good man, a simple man. He wouldn't stand a chance against the likes of Snake Eye Johnson. He had to warn him. But how could he do so without causing panic? Without revealing Morningstar's secrets to the whole town? The star tattoo. The needle glinted in the weak afternoon sun as Morningstar meticulously stitched the tear in Dusty's shirt. The rip, courtesy of a particularly stubborn fence post, ran jaggedly across the shoulder. She worked with a quiet focus, her brow furrowed in concentration. Dusty watched her from across the small kitchen table, a mug of lukewarm coffee warming his hands. He hadn't realized how threadbare most of his clothes had become since Martha. Well, since then, as she reached for the scissors, the cuff of her woven blouse slipped back, revealing her wrist. A small, 5-pointed star, inked in a faded blue, sat just above the pulse point. Dusty's breath hitched. He knew that star. It wasn't just any star. He remembered the wanted poster tacked up outside the general store in Harmony Creek. 2 months old, curling at the edges, but the details were burned into his memory. Wanted for questioning, Serafina, a.k.a. Star. Below it, a crude drawing of the same star tattoo, almost identical to the one on Morningstar's wrist. The poster had described her as dangerous and accomplice to a notorious gang of train robbers. His gut twisted. He looked at Morningstar, at the gentle curve of her cheek, the way she patiently taught his daughter Sarah to read. Could she really be that woman? He felt a cold dread creep into his heart, battling with a fierce protectiveness that had taken root in the weeks she'd been on the ranch. He wanted to ask her, demand the truth, but the words wouldn't come. He couldn't risk scaring her, especially not with Sarah nearby. He had to protect them. Both of them. Even if it meant protecting her from the law. Snake Eye arrives. The dust cloud preceded them, a swirling ochre beast crawling across the horizon. Dusty squinted, his hand shielding his eyes. The rhythmic thud of hooves grew louder, a drumbeat of impending doom. He recognized the lead rider even before he could make out the details. Snake Eye, his face a scarred map of cruelty. Behind him, a half-dozen rough-looking men fanned out, their rifles glinting in the harsh sunlight. Morningstar paused in her stitching, the needle suspended above the worn fabric of Dusty's shirt. He saw the flicker of fear in her dark eyes, a fear she quickly masked. They stopped their horses just yards from the porch. Snake Eye dismounted, his movement slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the parched earth. Rivers, he drawled, his voice a gravelly rasp. Heard you been harboring a guest. Dusty stood his ground, his fists clenched at his sides. You're trespassing. Snake Eye chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Don't play coy with me, old man. I know she's here. Morningstar. Or should I call her Serafina? His gaze flicked towards the open doorway where Morningstar stood frozen. Hand her over, Rivers. Save yourself some trouble. Dusty stepped forward, placing himself between Snake Eye and the doorway. She's done nothing wrong. Leave her be. He knew he was a fool, standing up to these men, but he couldn't bring himself to betray the woman who had brought light back into his desolate home. He met Snake Eye's gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. Get off my land. The secret passage. Morningstar stood frozen in the doorway, her hands still on the latch. Dusty Rivers' anguished bellow echoed from the front of the house, followed by a voice sharp and cold as river ice. Snake Eye. Little Bird, perched on the top step of the staircase, gripped the banister so hard her knuckles shone white. Rivers. You think you can hide her? Ain't nowhere she can run that I won't find her. Snake Eye's words vibrated through the floorboards. Little Bird didn't hesitate. She scrambled down the stairs, her bare feet silent on the wornwood. Come, she hissed, tugging at Morningstar's sleeve. The passage. Morningstar's eyes were wide with fear, but she didn't argue. Little Bird pulled her toward the great stone fireplace in the dining room. Years ago, Old Man Rivers, Dusty's father, had shown her the trick, a barely perceptible seam in the stonework, a pressure point that released a hidden door. She pressed, and with a low rumble, a section of the fireplace swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of damp earth. Little Bird grabbed a rusty poker leaning against the wall and handed it to Morningstar. "Take this. I'll find Papa's rifle." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it held a fierce determination that belied her small frame. She disappeared into the shadows of the passage, leaving Morningstar alone in the darkness, the heavy poker clutched in her trembling hands. The rumble of Snake Eye's voice, closer now, spurred her to action. Defending the ranch. Dusty felt the cold steel of Snake Eye's revolver press harder against his temple. The metallic tang of fear filled his mouth. "Just walk away, Rivers," Snake Eye rasped, the stink of whiskey heavy on his breath. "Ain't nothing here worth dying for." Dusty stared into the outlaw's one good eye, trying to find a flicker of humanity, but saw only a bottomless greed. His knuckles ached from clenching his fists. A floorboard creaked behind them. Snake Eye's grip tightened, his breath hitching. From the hidden passage, Morningstar emerged, her face pale but resolute. She held her father's ancient bow, an arrow nocked and aimed directly at Snake Eye's back. The air crackled with unspoken threats. "Let him go," Morningstar said, her voice trembling but firm. Snake Eye chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Well, look what we have here." Before Snake Eye could react, Little Bird launched herself from the porch, a whirlwind of fury, tackling one of the outlaws to the ground. The distraction was enough. Dusty shoved Snake Eye away, the gun firing harmlessly into the dirt. Morningstar released her arrow. It whizzed past Snake Eye's ear, embedding itself in the doorframe close enough to draw blood. The other outlaws, startled, drew their own weapons. The ranch house, once a sanctuary, erupted in chaos. "A new family. You can't hide her forever, Dusty," Snake Eye hissed, the lamplight glinting off the sweat on his brow. He pressed the barrel of his revolver harder against Dusty's temple. "She's wanted for murder." Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind them. Snake Eye whirled, but not fast enough. Morningstar emerged from a hidden passage behind the fireplace, bow drawn, an arrow trained on him. Her face was a mask of fierce determination, eyes blazing in the dim light. "Let him go," she commanded, her voice steady. Snake Eye chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "You think that little toy can stop me?" "It only needs to stop you once," she replied, and loosed the arrow. It struck the revolver from his hand, sending it clattering across the wooden floor. Before he could react, Little Bird darted from her hiding place and grabbed the discarded gun, scurrying behind Dusty. Dusty, momentarily stunned, found his resolve. He tackled Snake Eye, wrestling him to the ground. Within moments, he subdued the outlaw, tying his hands with rope from the nearby woodpile. The authorities arrived soon after, summoned by a ranch hand who'd witnessed the commotion from afar. Snake Eye was taken into custody, and Morningstar's name was finally cleared, the truth of her innocence revealed. That evening, after the dust had settled and Little Bird was fast asleep, Dusty sat on the porch with Morningstar. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "We make a pretty good team," he said, a genuine smile gracing his lips. She squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the setting sun. A profound sense of peace settled over them. Later, they went inside and Dusty gently tucked Little Bird into bed. As he watched them sleep, he knew he wasn't just a struggling widower anymore. He was part of a family forged in hardship and bound by love.